In this video, we're going to talk about how to add and subtract fractions with different denominators. And then we'll also talk about the order of operations. So to add or subtract fractions with different denominators, the first thing you have to do is find what we call the least common multiple of each denominator. So what that is the smallest number that both denominators divide evenly into. So then you rewrite each fraction as what we call an equivalent fraction, which means you just change its name, essentially. You change its denominator and therefore its numerator also. And then once the fractions have the same denominator, then you can add or subtract them using the steps for fractions that have like denominators, like in the previous video. So for example, if we have negative 8 over 11 plus negative 13 over 22, we need to find the least common multiple of 11 and 22. So one way to do that is just write multiples down. So multiples. For 11, 11 times 1 is 11. 11 times 2 is 22. 11 times 3 is 33. 11 times 4 is 44. Now you probably already noticed that, oh look, we have a 22 here and we have a 22 in our second denominator. So that's probably going to be our least common multiple. So let's see, 22 times 1 is 22, and now we can stop because we've achieved the same number. So 22 is our LCM, our least common multiple, which will become our least common denominator. Now, we need to change the negative 8 over 11 into something that has a 22 as its denominator. So, what can we multiply 11 by to get to 22? Well, we have to multiply 11 by 2. That means we also need to multiply the numerator by 2. Whenever we do something to a denominator, we also have to do the exact same thing to the numerator. Otherwise, we change the problem. This is a little math trick we call multiplying by a well-chosen 1, because 2 divided by 2 is really just 1, and anything times 1 is itself, so we haven't changed the problem. I know it's a sneaky little trick. Then we're going to add the negative 13 over 22. So, negative 8 times 2 is negative 16 over 22, plus we've got a negative 13 over 22. Now we have the same denominators, so we can just go to combining our numerators. So we have negative 16 plus a negative 13, which is the same thing as subtracting 13 from negative 16, over 22, which gives us a negative 29 over 22. And that cannot be reduced, so that's our final answer. Now, you should pause the video and try to do number 10 on your own. I will give you a hint. On this one, both fractions are going to have to be multiplied by something to get to our common denominator. Okay, now that you've tried this one, let's see what we can do with it. So let's look at our multiples first. So multiples. We have 8 and we have 3. So if we do 8, 8 times 1 is 8. 8 times 2 is 16. 8 times 3 is 24. Okay, 3. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 4 is 12. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 times 6 is 18. 3 times 7 is 21. And 3 times 8 is 24. So we see that the smallest number that is in both multiples list is the 24. So that's going to be our common denominator. So if we have negative 5/8 and we need to turn that into a 24, we had to multiply the 8 by 3, which means we have to multiply the numerator by 3. Then we're subtracting a negative 10 over 3, but that needs to be a 24 in the denominator, so we have to multiply the 3 times an 8, which means we have to do the same in the numerator. So that gives us negative 5 times 3 is negative 15 over 24 minus negative 10 times 8 is negative 80 over 24. Okay, subtracting a negative number is the same thing as adding. So we really have negative 15 plus 80 over 24, which is 65 over 24. And that does not reduce either. So we are done. So that's how we deal with adding and subtracting fractions that have unlike or different denominators. Now let's talk about the order of operations. So when you're simplifying an expression that involves multiple operations, we use the following order of operations. First, you simplify any expression within grouping symbols. So grouping symbols can be parentheses, they can be square brackets, they can be braces, it can be absolute value, it can be square roots, and also a fraction bar. So the fraction bar says simplify numerator, simplify denominator, and then do the fraction division. Then you evaluate any exponential expressions, roots, or absolute values. Then you do multiplication and division in order from left to right. And then you do all the additions and subtractions in order from left to right. So if we look at number 11, we start with the grouping symbols. I guess before I do this, there's PEMDAS, P-E-M-D-A-S, or please explain my dear Aunt Sally, or please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. I've heard it both ways. That's one of the ways for remembering the order of operations. So first, grouping symbols. So we have parentheses inside absolute values. we always start with the innermost set. So that's the parentheses. So that means we have 25 minus absolute value of 11 minus 6 plus 7 is 13. Now we evaluate what is inside the absolute value because that's the next grouping symbol. So 25 minus the absolute value, 11 minus 13 is negative 2. Now we evaluate the absolute value. So remember, the absolute value of anything is positive. So that's 25 minus this whole absolute value of negative 2 becomes a positive 2. And 25 minus 2 is 23. So that's our final answer for that one. Okay, you guys should try to do number 12 after pausing the video. And once you've tried it, then you can restart and check your answer. So the first thing, grouping symbols. So we have parentheses. Negative 3 minus 13 is negative 16. Then we still have the plus the 6 squared divide by the square root of 16. Notice I didn't do anything with that yet because even though the square root's a grouping symbol, there's nothing to simplify underneath it. 16 is already just a number. So now we do exponents and roots. So the negative 16 doesn't have an exponent. We'll leave it alone. The 6 is squared. So that's an exponent. So 6 squared is 36 divided by, and now we have to evaluate the square root of 16. The square root of 16 is 4. So now the next thing is multiplication and division, starting at the left. Well, starting at the left, the first thing we encounter is an addition, but we're not doing those yet. So we have negative 16 plus, here's a division. So we do 36 divided by 4, which gives us 9. And now negative 16 plus 9 is a negative 7, and that's our final answer. So that's it for this video. In the next video, we'll start talking about algebraic expressions.